This, the other day, was the divided line image that he created. The divided line was an abstract way of trying to get people to look at the nature of the good. Remember that his interlocutors have said, can the city ever come into existence? And he says, only if the philosophers are kings, which is a paradox. And that leads then to the discussion of what is it that a philosopher type actually sees, what's the vision? He says it's the vision of the good, a vision of the divine, a vision of God. He says that only somebody who has this vision is capable of ruling. And the majority of people don't ever have this vision. Well, how do you get to that vision? He says, on the one hand, it's through this transformation of thought, where we move from thinking only in images, or what he calls icons, to move to things, to objects, te mathematica, and then finally to forms, the eidoi. And only by going through that grueling and painful and rigorous process of actually forcing ourselves to think, or to be made to force to think, can we ever come to a position where we're seeing what he calls the good? That is, can we ever come to see God? In the Platonic view, then, thought is very closely related to religious vision. If you don't have this progression of thought, you really don't have religious vision. You don't really see God. You might think you do, but all you're seeing is just an icon. It's just an image. It's a shadow. And the majority of people, he says, live in a world of shadows. They never ask questions. They never go beyond the first impression that they get. And consequently, the world is rather claustrophobic. Well, all this is very cerebral. It's very abstract. It's very beyond his audience's capacity to understand. And because of this, he has to form a different myth, a different way of looking at this. So his interlocutors ask this question, leads him to that paradox. They ask the question, what's the good? He says, well, let me describe what the good is. And he develops this whole process in order to understand what the good is. He says that education of the mind begins in this realm we call images, icons, ikones in Greek. Most people stay down here. They think in terms of icons, images, shadows. It's a world of imagination where we imagine things on a regular basis. It's governed by number. But this is a realm that's very close to less truth, clarity, or nothingness, if you will. This is a realm where most people stay. It's a realm of mutable things that change all the time. But most people are secure with it. So to use a prop, the majority of people see the God of the book, right? The elephant God of the book. And they think that this has power. And they worship that. Don't touch that, it'll burn you. Oh, by its very nature, it has powers. It conveys graces. So if you bring it over to somebody, and most people think that this world of icons, of images, is all that there is. That this is the world of reality. And so they're stuck in a world that doesn't see beyond the opinable, beyond the world of shadows. Now, if, for instance, if you have somebody who says, wait a minute, wait, there wasn't ever really a God that looked like an elephant that read a book. It's just representing something. Solidity, strength, memory, education. And therefore, we don't need to worship physically that. What we end up worshiping and thinking about is what it represents. The thing that it represents. The qualities thereof in human nature of solidity and strength. He says this is the realm of trust, calculation. It's one step up from the realm of plastic Jesus. The people that follow plastic Jesus on my dashboard. I don't care if the rings are free as long as I got my plastic Jesus. Been right there on the dashboard of my car. That's this realm. The next realm up is, well, what does plastic Jesus represent? And you begin thinking about that and you move into a new realm. This realm of mutable things, the realm of the visible, he says, is a tall araton. the realm which changes constantly. Because all those images, plastic Jesus and the cards and the crosses and the brass elephants, they eventually decay. They turn to sand, like Ozymandias, right, in the vast desert. And so if we're worshiping those things, we're worshiping things that are changing. They're mutable. They're not permanent. But if, for instance, if we even worship what they represent in human nature, solidity and strength, for instance, with the elephant, and education, even those things are mutable too, because they change with human nature changing, passing in and out of the world, or people growing up, or what have you. So those are also mutable things. And he encourages us to move from mutable, unreliable things that are becoming to things that are permanent, immutable, unchanging. If you want to solidify your life, you move to things that are unchanging from things that are changing. Well, that's a huge step for most people. To move from even what a thing represents to something even beyond the representation itself is very difficult. But it is like a new birth. It's like you have to die in a way to that old life, and you get reborn into a new world of thinking. What Dante calls la vita nuova, a new world, a new life. This new life begins with a realm that he calls the realm of dianoia, of thought. Here's where real thought exists, not here, not here. Here we're trusting that these things are true. Here these things are physical, and consequently both these things are mutable. Here we're talking about real thought. What he means in this realm by the objects that we study, the ta mathematica that we study, is kind of like a blueprint, if you can imagine. The mathematical blueprint that these things here are only the physical manifestations of. That mathematical blueprint, which we see primarily in geometry, is the first realm of solid, immutable, unchanging thought. So an example. If, for instance, I draw on the board this, that's a physical object, and it represents something, square. But beyond square is the idea of squareness itself. Squareness itself is what we really want to look at when we look at this. We don't care about the fact that it's blue or that I didn't connect it to the edges here, that they're a little bit looped. That's not important. What's important is that this physical object represents a square, which itself is abstracted to squareness. What do we mean when we talk about squareness? Not just an individual square. Squareness has certain qualities that don't change. You know, it's like 90 degrees here and has a certain length, a certain size. You can like inscribe it with a circle, and you can do all these other things to it. And that's what we need to contemplate when we start contemplating the realm of objects of ta mathematica. Not just because it's math, but because, as he suggests, math governs every single thing in the universe, down to physical objects, thoughts, actions, time itself. So if we're going to look at something that's permanent, we're going to be looking at the blueprint that undergirds the very things that we deal with on a regular basis. That's this realm here, the realm of thought, of objects, of ta mathematica. And he suggests in this realm, this immutable realm, which he calls ta noaton, that the soul, the mind, because in Greek soul and mind are the same thing, which he calls nous, soul mind, is compelled to investigate on the basis of what he calls hypothesis. It makes its way towards an end goal, a telos. So based on the hypothesis, that is, this mathematical thing, this geometric principle, blueprint exists, we make our way towards a secure end point. The secure end point that we make our way towards is, in some ways, an abstraction. It is where we move beyond just the mathematics, beyond the geometry, to what the repeating pattern is. If the pattern appears here and here and here and here, then we begin to abstract to the level where we say that pattern within the geometry is a solid idea or form which is the governing thing of all the universe. And that is like you have to have an end point again, a dying point. You have to move beyond this idea or this point here of thinking of things as a blueprint to the actual repetition of the blueprint in forms. This is the last realm of thought here, what he calls the realm of intellection or gnosis. is governed by astronomy, he says. And it is a realm where the forms exist. Now, that term you're going to hear a lot if you take philosophy classes, theology classes, history classes, probably some literature classes. This term will come up frequently. It's called the theory of the forms by Plato. In Greek, the eidoi. The eidoi are much maligned because most people think the eidoi means, look, you got a chair, you have a perfect chair somewhere in heaven, up there somewhere. And Plato believed that there was a realm where this perfect chair sat next to perfect book and perfect elephant. That's really a bad interpretation. If you hear that, you can slap the person and then take the consequence. Because what he's really suggesting here is he's suggesting that the blueprint, the mathematical blueprint that governs all of creation, has repeating patterns in it. And those repeating patterns are the forms that govern over the blueprint. So, for instance, one might be this, which I've brought up frequently before, the two interlocking circles with the rectangle. That, I would speculate, is probably one of the forms. Because he brings it up so frequently, he's trying to embed it in our heads, and he's referencing it constantly. He seems to be suggesting that this is one of the eidoi. I was standing outside yesterday during that beautiful day, and after lunch, and I had no cares in the world aside for grading your paragraphs. And I was looking up at the sky and looking down at the ground, and I'm suddenly thinking to myself, it's kind of weird. The whole sky was like this circle dome above my head, and the whole world was like a dome down below. And right in the middle was the horizon, where sky and ground meet, and it was a like football, like a portal, like an entranceway, like a horizon that I could travel towards. And I suddenly thought, that's probably what he means. That this is the connection between heaven and earth. It's one of the eidoi. That the earth itself is based upon the forms. When he talks about the eidoi, at his last level of human thought, he says that the mind, the nous, studies or inquires directly into the patterns of life. You're no longer looking at the shadows. You're no longer looking at what the shadows represent. You're no longer looking at the blueprint that the representation is only a part of. You're looking at the very forms themselves that govern over all of this stuff. And so you're making your way back towards, like going up a river, make your way back towards the source of existence. Moving from the many towards the one. My suspicion is of the forms that there are very few. There aren't many of these. There are certain patterns that repeat over and over again in all of creation. One is probably that, another one is probably the spiral. But those forms are not multifarious. Primarily because in his philosophy, he was constantly thinking about the many versus the one. And he thought about how the one starts as unity and then descends into multifarious forms. So it would make sense that he moves from multiplicity to unity. And in unity, and I'll answer your question in a minute, Charlie. In unity, the mind then contemplates the forms themselves, thinking about those forms and how they repeat and what they look like. And thus it grasps, as he calls it, by power of dialectic, saying this is this way and this is this way, and how do these two fit together, which is what dialectic does. How does this fit with that? And it grasps by power of dialectic what he calls the good, thus making its way to an end goal. That's the furthest reach of human thought right there. But it's also a beginning at the same time. It is both a source and a summit, to use the Catholic delineation of the Eucharist. It is a source and a summit. You reach the summit of human thought, and at that point you reach the source of all our existence. The beginning is you are no longer contemplating the good, seeing the good, but you now are one with the good. At this point, when you have made your way up this long and arduous path out of the darkness into the light, you are no longer not just looking at God, you are God. And that's a pretty stunning concept to take in for a minute. Most of us think that even now in Christianity, we think that if we're good and holy, we go to a nice place that sits underneath the throne of God, kind of like going to Topeka or something like that. It's like going to Red Wing. And heaven is a place where all the souls hang out and play harps and wear nighties. But really, what he is suggesting, and I think what the church actually suggests, is that heaven is not a place that we hang out in like Miami. It is unity with God. So when you are very good and you have done all you should do and you climb up this arduous path, you become God. A very difficult concept. But I'm reminded of something that occurs in the Mass. There's a saying right where the priest is mingling the water and the wine. He says, by the mingling of this water and wine, may we come to share in your divinity, who humbled yourself to share in our humanity. If you've been an altar boy, you might have heard that. What he's suggesting is that even in the Catholic theology, God has humbled himself to share in our humanity, so we can share in his divinity and become one with him. A radically new, radically beautiful concept. He says that good is a realm where we are free from hypothesis. We no longer are just suggesting it. This is absolutely true. And it is a beginning that is also the totality of everything. The Buddhist says, make me one with everything. Right? It's like the Buddhist who goes to the hot dog stand and he says, make me one with everything. Right? The Buddhist says, make me one with everything. Becoming one with, not just one with the creative world, but one with the good itself is the ultimate goal. And that's why he creates this whole thing. Because what he's trying to show is not just these realms, realm of dreams and realm of reality or waking or life living. He's trying to show what is this thing like. It's beyond all human thought. It is the thought which cannot even be expressed anymore. Gotcha. How can you know what form looks like? First off, if you struggle with what he means by the forms, you would not be the first person to do so. Somebody said once that everything in Western culture is a footnote to Plato. I think it's a pretty interesting comment there. People have been debating about what did he mean by the forms. They've been debating that for generations, and nobody has really come to an absolutely satisfactory conclusion. Or I should caveat that. Very rarely have people come to a satisfactory conclusion. The best conclusion that I have found has been suggested by a guy, Thomas Scott, who actually suggests that the forms are these few geometric concepts. They're very few. They're limited. How would you recognize them? The way you recognize them, he suggests, and I think it's true, is by a lot of study, a lot of reading, which does not sound terribly tempting to most people. Read as much as you possibly can. Not just about this, but about everything around you. Study as much as you possibly can. Do a lot of mathematics. Not just for the grade, not just for college, not just for the honor of it, but rather in order to be able to conceive of what he's talking about. And once you do so, you begin to get an idea of what he's actually intimating. It's not available to most people. And the route to get there is so, in some ways, unattractive. The majority of people don't want to go that route. They're satisfied with plastic Jesus rather than going up to the very source itself. Are the repeating patterns we find in nature the forms? My speculation, backed up by a couple other authors, is that the forms that he's talking about are an abstract concept that shows up in repeating patterns in nature and also in art and architecture, which are fabrications of human thought. But that those repeating patterns are few. That's what he means by the forms. Now, if you don't get this at first blow, hey, it's okay. This is seriously complex stuff. It is, I think, very cerebral. And his divided line has been a pivotal element in Western culture for generations. So much so that we have based, well, first off, notice it goes back to this image that we've raised before of the indefinite dyad. That this here is drawn in such a way that I can put notes into it. But his original suggestion is take a line, divide it unevenly. A is to B as B is to C. Divide that again unevenly so that A is to B as B is to C. And divide that unevenly so that A is to B as B is to C. So you've got 4 divisions ultimately. But I can't put notes down here because it's too small and people would say, what, that word? So I can't do that. So I've expanded it so we can put notes into it. Just bear in mind, we can do this intellectually, but we can't do it on the board just because physically it's impossible. But his divisions are, again, the golden ratio, the indefinite dyad. So he's repeating this thing again so that we see it in a different way. In Western culture, this has been so influential that we've based our architecture on it. Our churches, for instance, are based on this 1, 2, 3, 4 fold division. Our Mass form is of this way. Notice in the Mass, we've got an Old Testament reading. We've got a New Testament and Gospel. We cross the line. We move into the second half of the Mass, which is the consecration. We have the consecration prayers leading up to it, moment of consecration and delivery, and then the end. And so the very Mass structure is based upon this. The path to holiness that shows up in art over and over again. Artwork shows this image over and over and over again. So we see it in artwork as well. So it's been highly influential in Western culture, Christian Western culture.